The fire was not an accident. Elena Marchand made sure of that. What no one ever understood was that it wasn't rage that made her strike the match, it was tenderness, twisted and exhausted. The kind of love that needs to end itself to finally breathe. Gabriel, the man she'd once built her life around, had always said she was too careful to burn. That night, she decided to prove him wrong. It happened in the house they'd bought when the world still believed in them. The house with white shutters, a piano no one played, and the smell of whiskey baked into the carpet. She'd filled it with gasoline in silence, drop by drop, every night for a week. He never noticed. He was too busy rehearsing forgiveness in the mirror. Too busy cheating again with words like healing and closure. When he came home that evening, she was waiting by the door in her old red dress, the one he used to love because it made her look like an apology. He smiled when he saw her, slow and uncertain. "You're wearing the dress," he said. "I thought you burned that one. I saved it for tonight." She led him to the living room, poured him a drink, and kissed him once, slow, deliberate. Final. The perfume she wore was heavy with smoke and orange blossom. A scent she'd mixed herself. When he said her name, it sounded like surrender. The flames caught fast. Gasoline has a way of turning love into light. She stepped back, watching the fire crawl across the floor, licking the walls. Devouring the piano first, their wedding song melting into static. Gabriel shouted, ran for the kitchen, then stopped when he saw her still standing there. "Elena," he coughed, eyes wide with the truth finally catching up, "please." She took one step closer, the heat curling her hair, her voice calm and even. "This is mercy," she said. "I'm setting you free the way you never could." He lunged toward her, and she kissed him again, hard enough to taste the smoke on his teeth. "That," she whispered, "is the last kiss you get to keep." Then she pushed him back. The floor collapsed behind him with a sound like thunder. When the firefighters arrived, they found her outside on the curb. Her face streaked with soot but unburned. Watching the flames eat the house she'd lived in for half her life. She told them he was still inside. Her voice didn't shake once. In the weeks after, she told the police it was an accident. They believed her. Everyone always did. Grief made her look innocent. But some nights, when the wind carried the scent of smoke through her open window, she could still feel him there, his breath hot on her neck, his voice rising from the embers. "You kissed me to save me," he whispered. She would close her eyes, press her lips to the air, and answer softly, "No. I kissed you to make sure you burned as someone I loved." Because the truth was simple, and she'd finally learned to say it. Love wasn't what set the fire. Love was the match that waited to be struck. By the second act, the fire had turned into legend. But Elena Marchand's life had cooled into something colder than regret. The investigation was closed, the insurance paid out. The papers called her the widow of the flame. Though no one could agree on whether she looked guilty or godly. She stayed in the same small town where the ashes of her house had been swept away by rain. People still crossed the street when she passed, not because they feared her, but because they didn't know if she'd already burned through forgiveness. Every morning, she woke to the smell of smoke that wasn't there. It lived in her lungs now, faint but loyal. Sometimes she swore she could feel heat under her palms when she touched metal. One night, while cleaning out the few things the fire had spared, she found his lighter, a small silver one engraved with his initials, blackened around the hinge. It shouldn't have survived, but then, neither had she. That same week, anonymous letters began arriving. The first was short, written in handwriting that looked too much like his. It wasn't the fire that killed me, Elena. It was your hesitation. The second came 2 days later. You kissed me like a promise. Was it? She burned the letters. She told herself someone was playing a cruel joke, some local who thought tragedy was theater. But by the fourth letter, the paper itself smelled of him. Amber. Tobacco. The faint sweetness of whiskey and breath. She couldn't throw that one away. She hid it under her pillow instead. By the end of the month, she started seeing him again, reflections that weren't quite right. Shadows standing where the light didn't reach. Once, she woke in the middle of the night to find a man's silhouette sitting at the edge of her bed, shoulders slumped, hands glowing faintly red. She didn't scream. She only said, "I told you to stay gone." He turned, half his face still beautiful, half made of ember. "You didn't mean that," he said. "You stayed to listen." The next morning, her pillowcase was scorched. She tried to confess to someone. But there was no crime left to explain, just a haunting without proof. She began visiting the ruins at night, where the house had once stood. The foundation was gone, but the soil was still black, still warm. Sometimes, when she knelt and pressed her hand to it, she could feel something pulse beneath. Not heat, not life, just rhythm. And then came the night when the ground began to glow, faint as candlelight. A single flame rose from the ashes, small, trembling, deliberate. She stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "I kissed you once to end it. What do you want now?" The flame flickered. The air around her tightened, heavy with smoke that smelled like memory. "One more kiss," it seemed to say. "Then I'll stop burning." But she didn't move, not yet. She just stood there in the dark, realizing that love and fire were the same lesson, neither ever ends. They just change shape until you mistake the heat for light. By the third year, the fire had learned her shape. It followed her quietly, obediently, like a shadow that no longer needed the sun. Elena lived by the coast now, in a small rented apartment where the walls still smelled faintly of sea salt and new paint. But beneath it all, beneath every breeze, every whisper of the tide, there was smoke. The kind that clung to fabric, to memory, to the inside of her lungs. She had stopped speaking to people. They always wanted to ask how it felt. The journalists, the neighbors, the therapists, each one circling the same sentence. What did it mean to kiss a man before setting him on fire? She never answered. Meaning was for survivors. She was only the witness. Then, one night in March, someone left a box outside her door. Inside, a burned photograph of Gabriel. His smile half melted, his eyes clear, untouched. Beneath it, a matchbook from their old house's bar and a single note written in handwriting. That made her throat tighten. "You said you'd let me burn. You didn't say you'd stop watching." The next day, the smell of smoke returned, stronger this time, heavier. When she opened her closet, all her dresses reeked of gasoline. She tore them down, one by one, but the scent clung to her skin. She bathed for hours until her hands wrinkled, but the water stayed clouded and gray. Faintly warm, as if the fire had been waiting inside her veins. That evening, she saw him again, or rather, she saw light. A figure standing in her hallway, glowing faintly orange. Not a ghost, not a hallucination, something else. He spoke softly, his voice like the crackle of burning wood. "You left me halfway," he said. "You kissed me into the flame, but you never stayed to see what it made of me." She stepped closer. The air around him shimmered with heat, but her body didn't recoil. It remembered him. "You're not real," she said. He smiled, his teeth glinting like embers. "Neither is guilt. but it still burns. The next morning, she woke to find the floor of her apartment blackened in the shape of two footprints leading to her bed. The sheets smelled like him. The pillow beside hers had a faint indent, as if someone had been lying there. She began writing him letters, not apologies, not love notes, but instructions. You can't have me again. You belong to the fire. Stay where you were beautiful. Every night she left the letter by the window, and every morning it was gone, replaced by ashes arranged in the shape of a mouth. Soon, the world around her began to change. The sea grew warmer. Birds stopped flying near her building. Even the mirrors fogged without heat. It was as if the air had begun to remember what she'd done. And one night, while she slept, he whispered again, this time inside her dream. Or maybe just under her skin. You kissed me to end me. Now I'm teaching you how to begin. She woke to find the apartment glowing faintly, her reflection flickering in the glass. The fire wasn't outside anymore. It was breathing through her, gentle, rhythmic, alive. And when she touched her chest, she swore she felt two heartbeats, one hers, one his, burning in perfect unison. By the fourth winter, Elena Marchand no longer dreamed of Gabriel's death, she dreamed of his breathing. The fire in her had stopped being memory, it had become pulse. The doctors said her heartbeat was irregular. But what they couldn't know was that it wasn't failing. It was sinking. The rhythm came from somewhere deeper than her body, older than grief. Sometimes, when she stood by the window and watched the sea flash orange beneath the sunset, she could hear his whisper timed perfectly to her pulse. You didn't kill me. You invited me in. Her apartment had grown strange. The mirrors no longer showed her alone. Faint silhouettes shimmered behind her, moving when she didn't. The paint peeled in shapes like flame. Even the furniture seemed to lean toward her when she passed. One night, she woke to find the air thick with heat, not unbearable, just close, intimate. Like someone sleeping beside her. On the nightstand sat a single matchstick, upright, balanced perfectly on its head. The sulfur tip glowed faintly in the dark, though it hadn't been lit. She began to understand that the haunting wasn't punishment, it was partnership. The fire she'd used to destroy him had become the only thing that refused to abandon her. When she walked through the city, streetlights flickered. When she whispered his name, candles leaned toward her voice. She was no longer certain whether he was burning through her or she was burning through him. One evening, she returned home to find the entire apartment lit without flame. The walls shimmered gold, the air perfumed with smoke and rain. At the center of the room stood Gabriel. Or the idea of him, his form alive only where the heat gathered. His skin glowed like molten glass, eyes bright and endless. You've kept me alive too long, he said. I tried to forget you, she answered. He stepped closer, his outline trembling. You did, he said. But forgetting isn't the same as cooling. She should have run. Instead, she reached for him. Her hand passed through his chest, but it felt like pressing against air thick with light. The heat flooded her arm, her lungs, her heart. Her skin began to glow where he touched her, not burning, merging. Is this death? She whispered. No, he said, his smile tender, tragic. It's combustion. The room ignited, not with flame, but with color. Every object began to dissolve into heat, the walls breathing, the ceiling pulsing. For a moment, she saw herself reflected in his eyes, both human and not, both sinner and saint. Her hair a halo of firelight. When the glow finally faded, the apartment was silent. Only one thing remained untouched, the matchstick on the nightstand, still upright. its tip cooled to ash. By morning, neighbors said they smelled smoke but saw no fire. They spoke of a light that flickered for hours and then vanished, leaving a warmth that lingered in the air for days. The police found nothing inside, no body, no heat, no trace of struggle. Only 2 sets of footprints burned faintly into the floor, circling each other, fading toward the window, and written above the bed, traced in soot, were words that no one could explain. The last kiss wasn't an ending. It was ignition. By the 5th spring, there was no trace of Elena Marchand, at least not the way the world remembered her. The apartment had been gutted, stripped of anything flammable, yet somehow the air there still shimmered as if sunlight lived inside it. The neighbors refused to move in. They said they could still hear her breathing through the walls at night, slow and warm, accompanied by a man's faint voice answering in rhythm, like 2 flames feeding each other oxygen. The fire investigators called it residual combustion. The priest who blessed the site called it purgatory with taste. But the few who knew Elena, the lovers, the students, the one detective who'd looked too long into her case, all agreed on one thing. She hadn't died in the fire she'd made. She'd become it. A year after her disappearance, a traveler found a burned letter lodged between 2 stones on the cliff where her first house had stood. The paper was brittle, but the handwriting was elegant, deliberate, unshaken. "They'll call this love," it read, but love was only the excuse. What I wanted was symmetry. He burned in light, I burned in shadow. Every time I close my eyes, I see the moment before I let him go. That's the real fire, the part that doesn't end. Beneath the words, faint fingerprints marked the page, black with ash and shaped like 2 hands pressed together. That summer, the coast began to change. Locals reported small bursts of flame flickering over the sea at night, too steady to be lightning, too gentle to be destruction. The water beneath glowed faintly gold, as though the ocean had learned to breathe fire. Fishermen swore they saw 2 figures standing just beyond the tide, one holding light, one shadow, always facing each other but never touching. When the wind shifted, the scent of burnt orange and salt drifted inland, soft, almost sweet. And if you stood very still, the air carried a whisper, spoken in 2 voices at once. Perfectly synchronized, patient, infinite. You kissed me to end me. You kissed me to begin. And then, nothing, only warmth, lingering just long enough to make the night feel human again.